Welcome back to Laravel Podcast Season 4. Today's guest is Caleb Porzio, the creator of, Livewire, Alpine, that one sushi, lots of good stuff. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back to the Laravel Podcast Season 4. Every single episode, I said every single topic is an episode. Every single episode is a single topic, and we are talking about something where we want to talk about a kind of important and key aspect to Laravel in a way that is really helpful and friendly to newcomers, but then also is interesting to people who've been around for a while. And so today we're going to be talking about routing, Blade, and Blade is templates in Laravel if you're not familiar. So really all kind of the front end stuff where you take the request from the user and you kind of send it back out. We're ignoring all the front end JavaScript and all that, which is funny considering who I have as guest, but it's all the more like the inherent native Laravel front end stuff. Before I say any more, I want to introduce my guest. This is Caleb Porzio of, so we've got Livewire, we've got Alpine, we've got that thing of stickers you did. I don't know what else do you do of things? So can you say hi to people and what did I miss?
That's funny.
You did this, but that was like the first big public thing you did after you left Titan, right?
Yeah. No,
so yeah. So anyway, say hi to the people and introduce yourself the way you would normally introduce yourself.
Sure, I'm terrible at introducing myself. I'm Caleb Porzio. What do I say now? I say like open source maintainer now, Laravel guy. But yeah, I created and maintain Livewire and Alpine. I used to work at Titan, your agency. And I work on other small things, but that's my thing.
Yeah, so this is basically nepotism, right? Like I'm just bringing on all my like friends and Titanites and everything like that.
Yeah, well, I figured I have a better chance of getting on now that I left Titan.
Now that I'm curious to unpack, but you know what? Actually, that's a good point because it's less nepotistic because, like I'm not, because I could have totally loaded last season of Laravel podcast with just all the people at Titan and had a really fascinating podcast, but I didn't. So you're right. I feel less pressure not to bring somebody on once they don't work at Titan. That was your plan the whole time, just to get on the podcast. Nice work. You did the job right.
Yeah, had to free up the space.
I love it. So Caleb so I want to really quickly introduce those two things because they are relevant. But then I want to talk a tiny bit of history between you and me talking about the front end and why I think that you are really the right person for this. So Livewire, I'm going to tell it in my way, and then you tell me what I get right and wrong. That's my favorite part of this podcast.
I also hate
people telling me what I get wrong. Yeah? All right. So Livewire, I've never actually done this before. Livewire is a combination of a Laravel tool and a JavaScript front-end tool that work together with each other. So you install it once. You're not going to use it just in JavaScript. You're not going to do it just in Laravel because it doesn't make any sense. It is a tool that is designed to basically. So if you're familiar with PJAX or why can I never remember the name of the Rails one? TurboLinks. The idea behind those tools, I think, would be helpful to introduce. TurboLinks and PJAX, the idea is that, let's say you have an entire web application, and every time you navigate between pages, the header stays the same, the left nav stays the same, and the footer stays the same, but there's this like middle div that you probably named content or something like that changes from page to page. And so in TurboLinks and PJAX, you basically point PJAX or point TurboLinks, which is basically the branded name of Rails version of PJAX, at that div, and you say, when somebody clicks a link, let's say they go from the home page to the about page, instead of actually doing a full server refresh, go using JavaScript, get the contents of the next page, the about page, and then swap out only the contents of that div, that content div with the content div from the about page, and then also use like push state to change the URL in the browser. And there's some niceties around it, so you can make the request in a way where the only HTML that's actually transferred over is just the HTML from that div rather than the whole div. But in the end, that's functionally what's happening, is that JavaScript is making a request, it's getting that new internal content, but the biggest thing is not only is it not transferring and re-rendering like the sidebar and the header and the footer, but it's also not having to completely request the entire HTML structure from scratch. It's not having to get JavaScript and CSS or any of the shared images and stuff like that. And so it feels fast like an SPA, but it also feels like a browser thing. And one of the cool things about it is, let's say you're on this about page and you hit refresh, then it gets that about page directly from the server. And then again, it's perfectly server rendered, but then every future navigation from there is replacing just the content in that div. So that's what PJAX and TurboLinks are like in general. So imagine that, but instead of this thing where you're just kind of stuck with that div, you don't get any like interactivity. And one of the difficulties for a long time about dealing with TurboLinks and PJAX has been like what does it happen when you interact with Vue? You have interactive Vue components on a PJAX page, and then the PJAX page changes. How does that change the Vue state? And there's a lot of complexity there. So imagine instead a circumstance in which there was an inherent integration with your Blade components, which we haven't talked about yet. So this is confusing to talk about first. So sorry, newcomers. I'll try to get past this part quickly, where basically your Blade components have knowledge and understanding that just that individual Blade component can be interactive in that way and can be recycled in that way and can have their view regenerated that way without the entire page having to refresh. So you get this level of interactivity and updated information from the server and little mini JavaScript requests to the server for individual pieces of the page, where that piece of the page is like the 10 posts in your paginated table, or whether that is the widget that's showing like the up-to-date stock ticker for the last 10 minutes, or whatever else it ends up being. You have these little pieces of the page that can also nest within each other, and the responsibility of Livewire is to basically allow you to write very simple, purely PHP components that take the responsibility among themselves of tracking their own state. It's sort of like a Vue type situation, but also handling the responsibility for when they should be doing those updates. So whereas PJAX is more just broad, like you got this content div, and when somebody clicks a link, it changes them to a different piece of content in the content div. Livewire is like that, but so much more integrated with Laravel, where each component is having its own state and its own set of responsibilities for managing its own knowledge of whether it needs to be refreshed or not. So it's much more like a React or a DOM type situation where components have their own state and they're responsible for like diffing the DOM between old version and new version. But you're not writing JavaScript. You're writing PHP the whole time, and you're really writing Blade. If you know Blade, you basically can understand how to write Livewire. That's how I think of Livewire. Caleb, how'd I do?
Yeah, you did pretty good. It's super tough. It's a super tough thing to explain. Even though it's fairly simple in practice, at least on the surface. The way I explain it, without getting into the internals of it, the most like basic explanation I generally give is the first magic you encounter with Livewire is that you can execute backend PHP codes, a picture of PHP method, like a controller method or something, where normally if you want to execute that code, you have to make a full request with a form post or visit a link with a URL, or if you're using Vue or React, you would make an AJAX request to an endpoint. Where Livewire gives you this magic where if you have like a button tag, you can add wire click and then specify the name of a method that lives in the backend. That's what clicked for me, because Livewire takes a lot from Phoenix Live View, which is a similar framework in a similar ecosystem. And that's what clicked for me. Like, I don't speak Elixir, which is what Live View is in, but it's once you see that cycle, when you just see that one button tag with wire click, in Phoenix world, it's Phoenix click, wire click, and then the method. And then the other screenshot is a PHP method with that same name. And you go, wait a minute, somehow clicking this button directly executes this method name. And then everything re-renders and does its thing without doing a full page refresh and whatnot. So that is pretty much the way that I explain it on a surface level. It's this magical thing that allows you to execute PHP code from the front end. At least that's how it feels,
Yeah. And that's why I think that you're the perfect person for this. So for those of you who are newcomers and you're like, I don't even know what Blade is, let alone what all this stuff is, the context here is basically Caleb has been writing JavaScript-based tooling to allow people to have much of the value of JavaScript without leaving PHP. And that's without leaving a specifically Laravel Blade. And that's a lot of what's really cool about it. And that's one of the reasons why Caleb's on for this call. He also wrote Alpine, which is a super, super, super light. Like if you were to imagine Vue, and I'm sorry to use Vue as a comparison, but if you were to imagine Vue without all the heaviness of like everything having to be components, like Vue is much like, if you use Vue just as single components on the page, it's much lighter than something like an Ember or React where you kind of have to do the whole deal. Well, this is even lighter than that. You're using really simple decorations by just adding basically tags to your HTML that automatically makes it like a couple lines of code and everything's interactive, and you're toggling state and tracking state. It's obviously not meant for single page apps or something like that, but for minor interactivity or medium interactivity on front end stuff, it's a really nice decoration. Again, how'd I do on that? I don't think I was as compelling on that one.
Perfect. It's an easy one. Cool. That's an easier one to explain.
Good. Cool. So Caleb has thought a lot about this, and the reason why I originally thought Caleb for this topic, which is, actually, you know what? Before I talk about that, No, I will go there. The reason I brought Caleb on this is because Caleb and I, for a long time, had been at Titan, had been a part of a conversation around what does the ideal front end look like for people who build the type of apps that Titan does. And we build very complex, robust, nuanced things, trying to use the simplest possible technology for the sake of ease of creation, ease of modification long-term, ease of maintenance for whoever we're handing the project off to. So we don't want to pick the coolest, hottest thing because that's often also the most costly thing to implement and often the most difficult thing for them to either hire for in the future or for their programmers to work with. So we want to use the thing that's the closest to kind of like the core. And so we would often find ourselves in situations where someone would say, well, that's obviously a Vue SPA or React SPA. And we say, how can I do this in Blade? Or someone would say, well, yeah, I just instantly begin my project by writing a Vue SPA and then APIs. That's just it. And we would say, I always begin my project by writing it in Laravel's basic stuff and just add the JavaScript when I absolutely have to. And so Caleb and I were very often on kind of like team, at least at the beginning we weren't, right? But I think we quickly coalesced on the same team of keep it in Blade as much as possible, keep it in Laravel as much as
Team
possible.
Blade didn't exist. It was Team Vue and Team React. Those were the brand teams. And
that's definitely true.
One day, it's like, wait a minute, I'm actually Team Blade.
And I had unknowingly been Team Blade, but I think I kind of thought it was just because I'm an old man. But I think we realized in conversation that we were like kind of Team Blade and we were on our own little space. And then after leaving Titan, Caleb built Livewire, which to me really kind of put Blade in the space of it's now like React Vue and Blade. Now, obviously, they're not exactly the same thing, React Vue and Livewire, but Livewire provides a lot of that, kind of like front end interactivity without having to leave Blade, which I love. And so that's among other things, the fact that he's just very knowledgeable. I think that's one of the reasons I really got excited to get Caleb on here is because he thinks a lot about working in the front end and working well with Laravel and Blade. So today's topic is about two things. It's about routing and views, and we're actually going to jump straight into routing first. Okay. And so what I want to say with the routing is because I want to start there for two reasons. I think the first one is because I think that Laravel routing is the first place that every app hits. That's not technically true. You've got middleware and stuff, but like for the average development experience, routing is the first thing you hit. And second of all, routing serves two things. One of them is to parse the incoming request, and the other one is to pass information off to Blade, technically, or APIs, whatever. So let's just start with routing in an HTTP MVC app or routing in Laravel. How do you describe how routing works and what it's doing to a 5-year-old, or in the simplest way possible?
So I have a surprise for you. I read this in the little sheet, and I thought, I know a couple 5-year-olds. My nieces and nephews. Did you
try it with a 5-year-old?
I thought, I'm just going to call my nephew up, Sammy.
Yeah.
He's 4, almost 5.
Close enough.
And my brother-in-law, his dad, is a programmer and he's Salesforce, but he knows Laravel a bit. So anyway, I got him on the phone right away. I recorded the call, so you can put it in if you want or not.
Did you? Yes, it's going in here, right?
I haven't heard it yet,
but I'm just going to cut it in right here.
There's full permission to put it in here. I think it would be cool. But so I think my first response is that you need to change the age range of that question. I don't think
you go for like 7 or 8, maybe.
Yes. Well, so I do the 5-year-old. And I start, Sam, I'm going to misquote it because you're probably going to show it. But anyway, I'm like, Sammy, so I very soon I get to the question, Sammy, do you know what a computer is? And he goes, I think I've heard of it.
Oh God. Like, oh my God. You're like, I'm in trouble.
Yes. You go on the iPad with your mom. And then we start going to like the iPad, whatever. So I quickly realized like, I just got to save face, be like, thanks for helping me out, Sam. Whatever. Good job.
That's fantastic.
Can you put your brother on the phone who's 7?
And, perfect.
So I get Danny on the phone, and now he knows what a computer is. And he's even expressed ambition in becoming a programmer someday.
Okay, all right.
And so the conversation was a little bit better, but I was explaining it through. Basically, I quickly found that his experience with the internet is really answering like fun, like BuzzFeed type quizzes with his mom. So I use that as a platform of like, okay, so you're on that's a website, okay, Dan? Yeah, okay, that's a website. Now, when you click a button in the quiz, what happens? Well, it, shows you the answer. Okay. How does it know? And so I was like, Danny, I just need to get you to the place where I can ask you, what is routing in Laravel? And you tell me. So whatever. Anyway, you'll hear it, but I'll say that I was sort of, I thought it would be a fun experiment, and it was, but I think we even might need to go to like 12 years old.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
might need to bump the
All right.
age to be useful.
Well, let's go for 12. Give me 12. I imagine I'm your 12-year-old cousin then.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, routing, honestly, I'm okay. The actual 12-year-old version is that when you go to a website, you put something in the URL bar. What is the URL bar? Little white box at the top of your browser. What is a browser? Okay. We're back in the loop.
Internet.
You put the internet. You put something in the browser. You have the website and then slash and then thing and then slash. Those things are like looking up files in a folder or something. You're putting a key in and you're getting a value out. The routing layer, routes, whatever. A route is basically a map. It's a link from that key to the page you want to show the user. I mean, that would be my 12-year-old definition, I think.
Yeah.
But I think I have a better definition because most people listening to this aren't 12.
Yes, this is true.
I think this is an important thing to... I try to put my newbie hat on to go back to how I felt when I was encountering all this stuff for the first time.
Yeah.
And when you start learning, web design, you realize, whoa, I can create an HTML file with Notepad, double click it and open it in my browser. So that URL bar can point to files. Then you learn, you could put that on a website. I could host that on a server and now it's slash, about.html or slash a different thing. You link to different pages. And then you learn PHP, which is like HTML, but it goes through a program first that changes it in some meaningful programmatic way. So it might be about.php. Well, anyway, okay, so that was like me learning PHP. But then when I encountered, I think Yi or CodeIgniter, I forget which one was first, but one of those frameworks, when I encountered them and seeing that the URL bar became something different, where like the routes, they weren't files anymore. It wasn't .php, and that threw me for a loop. It was like slash, just a word, admin, slash user, slash one, slash show. I was like, wait a minute. So this mapping, this file thing, you're just faking it? You're like intercepting it somewhere and saying, let's fake it. And so anyway, I think that's worth mentioning, or like going back to that root. Yeah. That was a big realization for me, is that routing is like pretending to be a file. It's like you call a file and the server's like, I know you want this file, or, it knows how to respond by calling one file, index.php, and deferring the file choice to you in the router. You could create a route called about.php. You could literally do that, and you would return whatever you want. Okay. Yeah. That's how I think it's a
fantastic point. I love that. I love the pointing out, because so if you were to upload a Laravel application to your server and had not taught that server that every single request in the server, no matter what the URL, should go over to public/index.php, you wouldn't have a functioning Laravel application.
Right.
And so it is depending. Go ahead.
It's important to recognize what layer does that. And that's the Nginx or Apache layer.
Or Apache or whatever.
Which is your server program, which is something that, again, is confusing at first. But that's the layer that really handles the magic. And then Laravel just has an index.php file and is able to...
That's a great point.
But
anyway. Like the most important piece of the routing happens before your Laravel app even gets touched.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So you got an Nginx configuration file or a .htaccess or whatever else. There's a directive in there that's somewhere, and usually it says if a folder's a folder, show the folder. Yeah. If a JPEG exists or if file exists or something like that, show the file. Otherwise, basically, it's like a fallback. It says if this thing that somebody just typed /about or whatever doesn't exist, then serve index.php and give it all the parameters that it needs. So basically, index.php says, oh, I'm being called. It spins up Laravel, and then Laravel has the ability to say, now, what were you called with? Oh, /about/. Well, let's go look that up in our routing stuff. Yeah. So then we get into Laravel routing. I think that's a great point. So Laravel routing. So what? Just really quickly, how is Laravel routing structured, and is it similar or different to other routing you've seen? Like if somebody's just either not familiar with how to define routes at all, or if they've done it elsewhere, what's your experience there, and how it's similar or different, or what's new or whatever?
Yeah. I guess what it looks like in Laravel, I'll start there. In Laravel, currently there's a folder in your root project called routes/web.php. So web.php is the first place you start, where all the routes are listed. And you write a route with route and get and whatever, the name. And again, it's this map. It's like route, get, post.
Yep.
Get means a get request, like you're viewing a page. You could do a post request, like you're submitting a form. Route, get, post, and then you're returning a view, which we could get into later, which is some HTML with magic or whatever you want, or returning JSON or something like that. The way it differs then, at least, so like I said, I got into CodeIgniter before Laravel. I know you were into CodeIgniter before Laravel.
Yep.
And CodeIgniter does have the concept of routes, but it's almost secondary. It's like, am I right in saying that CodeIgniter intuits, if you do like post/show, there's some, system, some convention that it will auto look up the method in a controller. So really, you're not, in CodeIgniter, you're not thinking of routes in terms of, what am I going to name this route? It'll be post/ID. You're not thinking of that. You're thinking, I have a post controller, a show post controller with a show method, and then you layer the routes accordingly. So routes are kind of magic and it's the same for Rails. So I looked up routing in Rails and I thought this was the case. And it is the same, that like similar to CodeIgniter, by default, it's the convention of automatically looking up your controller and then your method based on a route, like intuiting the method that you're running from a controller. So anyway, this was something that when I came to Laravel, I was really jazzed about. I don't know, because I love it. It's almost like, well, wouldn't you want convention over configuration or something? But really in Laravel, it's just, you go to one file and it's all laid out. It's all there. Every entry point in your application is in one file. And that is like a lighthouse in the sea. You're sailing along and like you can just see the lighthouse, you go back to that, and you can always trace a thread through your application back from web.php. So
and I love that point, because Laravel's often known for being kind of like convention over configuration. Like, and for anyone who's not familiar with that phrase, it basically just means by default, there's going to be the way things work, and you can change it, but you don't have to set everything up every time. There's a lot of default conventions so that every Laravel app operates the same way, and you don't have to start every app you ever build by making decisions, because most of those decisions are made in the conventions. And so it's interesting that in this particular space, like there's other people that are have more conventions. And interestingly also, Laravel had more routing conventions in the early days, and they've really been discouraged because we kind of got bit by them a lot. And that's one of the things I think I like the most about like Laravel Magic and Laravel conventions, is that like we have had some conventions that have gone away because they were difficult. Yeah. And one of them was people would map an entire like segment to a resource controller or a controller or whatever. What was the other name for it? But basically it just says like if you were to map something to /posts and you had a post controller, you could set a definition in the routes file that says everything under /posts goes to this controller, period. And we kind of as a community primarily stopped using that because it's it's bitten so many people so many ways. We're like, don't do that anymore. So we've actually moved from more magical
route resource.
You can, but
but it's just people don't.
Resource routes. Well, there's two of them. There's resource routes, which is just like the index show, whatever. Right. But there was another one that was like everything. I can't remember the name because it's been so long. Yeah, it was like a wild. I can't even. Okay. It's been so long since I did it. Hopefully, I'm not making that up, but I'm pretty sure.
Gotcha.
But even with resource routes, we still tend to say don't use resource routes or controllers. Like actually define the whole thing. Yeah. I have less trouble with it, but still, I think it's a little bit more likely for someone to not find the lighthouse because the lighthouse was implied by a resource controller and just map the thing. Now I'm very curious. Am I making that up, or is that true? I think there was a global wizard one but now maybe I'm just overcomplicating resource routes. So anyway, routes/web.php. You mentioned both what it is and also how it's different to some other routing. So basically, we often talk about routing being the traffic cop, although we also say sometimes the controllers are those. And I guess it's a good note that you said, which is controllers are very often a piece of, the routing, because routing is not just routes/web.php. It's also what takes something in there and sends it over to the end result. And man, I feel like we could have a whole episode purely about the process of taking an input and generating an output, and what types of different outputs can you return and how are they converted.
That's your let's start talking. That's everything.
Yeah. And I was like, maybe let's not go there the whole way. But there is a good note, which is that so you were mentioning that it's a map, and anyone not familiar with the map in programming, it usually just means like, if you were to imagine like an associative array or a key value, a whole bunch of key value pairs. The keys on the left side, it's sort of like the thing that you're using to look something up. And on the right side, it's the value that you're going to get if you enter that key. Like that's kind of what we often mean when we're saying maps in JavaScript.
Yeah, it's more
and stuff like that.
A legend is probably a better metaphor for that. Like a legend on a map.
Yeah.
Like
That would be a
Or,
better terminology.
But yeah, for some, like that is one of those words that now is second nature for me.
Yeah.
But I remember being, but that, because it's used in very specific ways, like a lot of programming languages have maps as a data structure.
As an actual data structure.
But then, there's like lookup maps, there's just mapping, all that stuff. And it's good to clarify that in my mind, mapping just means relating a group of things to another group of things, basically.
A whole bunch of inputs to a whole bunch of outputs. Yeah, one to one.
Yep.
Usually. So what he kind of means is like if you imagine the routes file that it's going to be in lookups, which is the router, a definition of a wildcard for a route, and then the thing that maps to. And usually the thing that maps to is going to be a string defining a view name. It's going to be a string defining something you should redirect to. It's going to be a closure or an anonymous function that actually is the body of that route, or a controller method, which is also going to be a function that's the body of that route. So basically, at some point, you're defining, other than the shortcuts of the view or the redirect, you're usually mapping a single URL or URL pattern over to a chunk of procedural PHP code that tells you what to do there. And usually at the bottom of that PHP code, it returns something like a view, which is why we're kind of connecting these in routing. So let's talk about views and Blade a little bit. I actually wrote in my notes here, to be honest, I have no idea how to describe this to a 5-year-old. You can try, but if not, how would you describe views to a procedural PHP programmer? So whatever it looks like, can you talk about templating and Blade templating in particular? Yeah,
I guess if I were explaining this to pre-PHP framework Caleb, who was just learning PHP with, WAMP or whatever at the time.
Right.
And so when you encounter PHP, it's cool because so you could name a file like like before you had about.html and it's your whole cool about page where you talk about yourself and you have a picture that's floated left. Then you could change that with WAMP or some machine that understands PHP. We don't have to get into that, but you could change that to about.php and it would still work. It would work the exact same way completely. But the magic is you could, let's say where you say, at the bottom you have the copyright, like at copyright 2019, and then 4 years later it's still 2019. For that little 2019, you could basically break out of static HTML that just exists and is hard-coded into a file, into PHP with the syntax of less than $PHP to kind of open up the PHP gap. And then now you're in a programming language, so you can echo out the current year. Echoing meaning like print or put or whatever, spit it out, and then close that PHP, and then you're back to static HTML. So when I first encountered PHP, it was sprinkling dynamic behavior into static HTML files. And then I remember the first question I had is like, how does a form work? Actually, what led me into programming was designing HTML sites. And then I thought, how does a username and password form work? Like I see the form tag, I see that on, W3 Schools, but what do you do with that? How do I do something smart? Why, if I post this, I don't understand. And that question is what led me to PHP and then a CodeIgniter and then a Laravel and then here.
Interesting. Yeah.
So that then you get into PHP where you're actually doing smart things like handling a form request and going into a database and doing something, deeper. So anyway, I guess all of this to say that at its core, PHP, or at least the way it used to be primarily, is a templating language. Like that's what it was for, is templating. Yeah. But it's become so, the needs have gotten so much bigger that the way we design our applications is not that way. We design them as if it's any other big boy programming language. And then at the end, you do all your work, you do all the calculations and computations and figure out what year it is. And then at the end, you do the templating. And then we call it the view. So it's kind of this shift of, view is basically, a view is what PHP used to be for me, what all of it was. But now it's just where the HTML happens,
Yeah, I like that. Because we definitely often think of the views as like the last ditch piece of it. Like there's so much code and so many files before you hit the view. And that's a really good point that even when my PHP applications got more complicated, there was, 10 lines of PHP at the top of the thing that says include comment.inc and, connect MySQL parens and, import header dot,
right
or
in line
templates
there.
/header.inc, whatever. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But in the end, the primary file was still just the template, and the template was bringing in the external code. And I mean, you could sort of think of it that way as well. But let's say instead of the template bringing in the external code, you now had the code itself bringing in the template, which is basically what a framework is, right?
Right. Yes.
Like it's a whole bunch of code that, at least for web views, just brings in a template and throws data into it at some point.
And the one place, this is kind of funny, I think not that long ago, maybe a month or two ago, I don't know what spurred this, but I just noticed, I know everyone notices this, but every PHP file starts with that same $PHP. You don't have to end it, but it just starts with that. And you just do it like second nature. But other programming languages, you don't do that. You don't break out into the programming language. You are in the programming language. You are in it. Yeah. And so it's like this throwback that like we have one little nugget left that's hinting like, hey,
the old days.
I am a templating language, And
that's if you were to write PHP today,
now.
Yeah, there's probably some things you would do differently.
Like,
one of them is probably not requiring that. Yeah.
Not required. Exactly. That would be probably the first thing. And then I wonder, can you just write an HTML tag before that? I don't know. That would be fun.
That's an interesting question. I feel like you could in some, but a lot of the other ones, there's one of the things you'll hit, just side note, is that a lot of things, once the moment you write any HTML, it sends a header. And so you lose the ability to send headers. So if you had any HTML in any of your PHP tags, then your response would give you an error saying can't send headers. Headers have already been sent.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, try it sometime.
Okay.
Yeah, because the moment you echo any HTML to the browser, it assumes you're just getting generic headers, and so you can't customize your headers after that.
Wow.
So
good nugget.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, nugget. Yeah, and that's actually one of the reasons I believe why we don't end our PHP tags anymore, is so you don't have that accidental space at the end that gets sent as a character. I think. Cool. I think it's to protect us from that. Nice. Yeah, got some old learning here. I think. Yeah. The number of corrections I'm going to get on Twitter after this episode is going to be interesting. So let's talk about Blade. So Blade is Laravel specific templating language, and of course Laravel can work with other things like Twig, and you could actually, I believe you can still just write straight up PHP templates as well.
Totally.
If you just don't put .blade.php, or actually I guess even in your Blade files. So what is unique about Blade, or what makes you like Blade more than other templating languages you've worked with? Yeah.
So PHP itself is a templating language, and sometimes I forget that because there is like a for each colon. I remember like I learned that after even learning Laravel, I think. That there's for each colon. I'd probably been doing open curly brace my whole life, but anyway, so
your life was changed.
Yes.
Forever.
Other templating languages, so other PHP templating languages, I don't really have experience with Twig.
Okay.
I guess, what is CodeIgniter? In CodeIgniter, do you just use normal PHP for your templates?
I think you just use normal PHP.
Remember.
It's been a long time, but yeah, I think so.
Okay, so I guess that's maybe a good starting point. In CodeIgniter, you're in a controller. So just like in Laravel, you have some route. It points to some controller method where you're returning the view. That's the end of it. And you're passing in data to the view. And in CodeIgniter, you build up your view. So you remember this pattern. I'm sure like you currently maintain an app with this pattern, perhaps.
Not anymore.
Not anymore?
Not anymore. It's all Laravel now.
That's awesome.
Yes, but I do remember. I called it pass to view. So I had a variable named pass to view in every method.
Okay. Yeah. So basically you build up in CodeIgniter, I would build up a view. So I would first spit out a header, and then the body, and then the footer, which is pretty good. It's logical. It's like procedural, where Blade takes a different approach. Blade is like eggshells or something. Instead of just stacking things on top of each other, you're spitting out a thing that then specifies what it's wrapped in, and could be multiple layers of wrapping, which is very different. So in Blade, you have the concept of layouts, basically, is what I'm getting at, where you would have which I like, because instead of, like in CodeIgniter, you might have related things in the header and the footer, but they're in two separate files,
Yeah.
Where with Laravel, your layout file is the whole glimpse, and then your content is one little bit. It's, yield content. So you get kind of the full picture of the right slices, and I liked that a lot coming to Laravel. That was a hurdle for me, because it's a little bit more complex than just stacking
Yeah.
HTML.
Yep.
But it makes so much more sense. And then so Twig, I actually dug into Twig a little bit just to see if I could find any differences. And I couldn't really find much on layouts. I don't know if Twig just doesn't have the concept of layouts, but it's not like there was a page called layouts, you know?
Yeah, it does, but its inheritance is much less nuanced. But again, it's because of that I stopped using Twig, so I haven't used it in ages. But yeah, Twig doesn't do inheritance nearly the way that it does, and so I don't think you can do the type of layouts that you're talking about. It feels much more like the old way, where you include one thing and then you include another thing and then you include a thing below it.
Yeah.
Rather than these ideas where you're leaving like little holes in it that say this hole is going to be filled later by something else that extends me, basically.
This speaks to all of Laravel for me. One of the things I love most about it, and I think we touched on with the routing, is that Laravel is not all magic everywhere. It's not a complete layer of frosting over hard wires. It's this beautiful mixture of the right levels of magic and the right levels of exposed brick.
Yeah.
And I think a perfect example of that is the routing. I love that it's not automatically assigning the code to my route. I love that I get that place for that. I think another good example is something in other templating languages, when you are echoing something. So you have in Blade, it's curly braces, 2 curly braces, and then a variable. So if you're spitting out the current year, it would be curly brace, date function Y, and then it would spit out the year. In another templating language, you would likely have extra features, like a pipe where you could add on a filter, and maybe there would be magic things for uppercasing and lowercasing. And that's just more stuff you have to memorize. It's just more burden to bear. And in Blade, you just use PHP. Like, that's the recommendation. Even though in the other ones you probably could. I think this is another area where I love how Blade it doesn't have a feature or an API for everything. It puts you into PHP, and it takes care of the things that are normally a little annoying. Yeah, which, I mean, and I think it's a great point, because actually I believe in Twig, you can't use normal PHP. And so you'd find yourself in a situation where, let's say you wanted to do an array filter on something in Twig. Well, if array filter doesn't exist in Twig, you have to go see if somebody has written, or you have to go write yourself an array filter Twig extension, which I've done before. And I don't know if I did it with that, but we had to do things. And it's actually like you have to develop a whole package to use this one feature in Twig. And not to say like Twig's terrible or anything like that, but with Blade, at any point you can just drop down to PHP. Yep.
You know, and Blade makes certain things a lot easier, like for each and if and inheritance and all that kind of stuff, which is great and we're very grateful for. But in the end, you're just writing PHP templates that have some decorative language in them, rather than writing a brand new thing that you have to, you know, not only memorize everything, which is the whole thing, but also you can't do anything that's not in their defined spec. I love that. That's a really great point.
Yeah. One thing I think worth mentioning for newcomers or latecomers or whatever, that the curly brace, the double curly brace, echoing something in Blade, what's the difference between just doing open up PHP and echo? Because it is functionally the same thing. But inside when you do that, you're also escaping whatever you are echoing out. So in other words, if you have a database field for the about of a user's profile, their about section, and you make it a text area on the page, and let's say, I don't know, for however this happens, they write literally HTML inside of that has a script tag with some bad script injection stuff, and you echo it out. You echo out the user's about on a page publicly. You would expose the world to this JavaScript attack. Where Blade, when you use those double curly braces, you're automatically protected from harm. Basically, it escapes those out, so you'll actually see those HTML tags literally shown instead of processed by a browser. And I think that's an important note for people, that you're just taken care of in a way that is kind of behind the scenes, you know.
And I love that, because one of the things we've long said is that Laravel takes care of you in certain ways like that. Like, it protects you from SQL query injection because it by default escapes all that, these things. But I think there's a lot of other ways that it helps you learn that I have not realized, and until the last couple of years, which is, just to give one example, like a lot of people have told me, when I asked them, where did you learn design patterns? They said, I had to learn them to work with Laravel because the design patterns are embedded in Laravel. And so in order to understand how to work with Laravel, I had to learn this design pattern. And I'm like, That's a really interesting idea. Like, so Laravel is actually helping us do better, like in a lot of different ways that we don't always necessarily know. But you're right. Yeah. Just like, you don't have to know that you're being protected in order to be protected. You don't even need to know that you need to be protected in order to be protected. You just are.
Yep. Yeah. It's invisible until until the day where you need to actually echo out something unsafe for a purpose. And then
you can go learn what you're doing.
And then you figure it out.
Wow. I was protected this whole time. That was great. Yeah.
Yep. Totally.
That's cool. So the simplest use case for routing is, routing, just taking a request and spitting out results. The simplest use case for Blade is views, but there's other aspects of working with routing. There's other aspects of working with views that are a little bit more common, but maybe a little bit harder to kind of either understand at the beginning or describe. And some examples there are like, for example, route groups is one thing that's a little bit more complex. I know that views has stacks, and there's also sections and stuff like that in yield. Could you talk about a few of the most common patterns and tools between routing and Blade that you use on a regular basis, or you think people do, that it'd be good for everybody to at least get familiar with?
Sure. Is there a section of this episode where we talk about common gotchas, or is this section?
Yep, that's the next section.
Okay, just want to make sure that we get there. Otherwise, I would stuff my gotchas in
totally.
Here.
Yeah, that's next.
Yeah, I guess common like next level mechanisms for routing, grouping is perfect. So like, let's say you have a whole chunk of, your landing page on the site is a public facing site, or it's a public facing route. You want to spit that stuff out to the public. Your login page is a public thing, but then everything inside of your application, the admin panel, that's all protected under authorization, a user authentication. A user has to be logged in to see that stuff. And I think that this is great, but the way to do it in Laravel basically is to take those routes and put them inside a route group. So you might have a route group for all of the public routes, and then a route group for all of the non-public routes. And when you declare a group, so actually the syntax, like route : group, and then you can pass in a callback or just a function, a PHP closure, whatever, where you then, declare all your routes. So you copy and paste all your routes and stick them in that function. But when you're declaring the group, you can assign it things. You can assign it middleware like auth or guest if you want to kick guests back, if for visiting it. Like it's great for a place for middleware. It's great for prefixing. You can prefix a whole group. If everything is within if everything in an admin panel should be /admin, you can pass like route : group and then prefix /admin. You can also prefix route names, which we should talk about route names. That's a good one.
Totally should. Yeah. Huge boon to start using that.
Yes, that's a good tip. Like I remember early on sort of seeing the light and never looking back. In every other framework or anything I've used, when you're dealing with routes all the time, like you have you have your homepage, which has a logout button, and maybe that button posts to an endpoint /logout. So you hard code, you literally write in /logout, then way down the road, you need to rename it for whatever reason to auth /logout. And now you have to do a global find and replace, which is easy in that case, but in other cases, it's not always easy. There's maybe wildcard stuff. Maybe you used PHP to build up that route. And then it becomes harder and more brittle, more fragile. It just becomes a chore, basically, if not a liability. So route names are like variables. It's a map, basically. Route names are variables for your routes. Yeah. So when I'm defining a route, let's say I have an admin route :get admin, and then I'd put in a controller method or something. And then at the end of that, instead of just putting the semicolon, I could do arrow name and specify a name, like maybe it's just admin. But typically they're more nested. It might be like auth.logout or, admin.show.something. So now you have, it turns what was just hard-coded strings everywhere into a function that you can interact with. So now when you're echoing out that logout, instead of just hard coding /logout, you would do route. You would route as a function, route function, and then pass in the string logout or auth.logout, and then it would echo out itself. So that's a good one. I think that's a good mechanism.
And you made that transition when you were talking about groups, and that's a great point. Like, for example, if all of your admin routes are in a group, you can both prefix the URL with admin, but you can also prefix the name with admin.
Yes.
So you can assume that all the names of those routes are going to be admin.something. You can also do it once in the group rather than having to replicate or duplicate it every single time for every single route in that group.
Super useful.
That's a great point. Are there any Blade things that you want to talk about that are really valuable? You know, more than just basic Blade.
Right. I mean, layouts are really valuable.
Yeah.
And maybe one of the, this is something I used to be scared of. I think that layouts in Blade is a little bit of a next level concept. I think for new people, if new people are like me when I was new, it's one of those things you struggle through to get set up in your app, meaning you have your base layout that has your, loads whatever, Bootstrap or Tailwind CSS, your head tag, whatever. And then maybe a section of your site is we'll use the admin panel. There's, specifics about the way the admin panel, the header, the footer, stuff like that, the sidebar. So you have this kind of middle layout, and then you have your end view, which are all the different views inside of admin. That setup is something that every time I needed it, I would struggle through, read the docs, go through everything, look at example apps, get it done, and then never thinking about it again, and then dread it the next app that I was building. Do you identify with that? Do you ever remember feeling that way?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and usually for me it was because I didn't understand what needed to go in what, and also which terms to use for section and extend and yields.
Right.
And all
yes.
that kind
Exactly.
of stuff. Yeah.
And I don't have the cure. I think, you learn over time, but I do have one cure. One specific tip that basically, because I would get very overwhelmed with, okay, if you just do section and yield, section and then end section and then yield those sections, if you just do those, it will not work. It will work for just 2 layers. But if you have that middle layer, like I was describing, where you have the base layout and then your app layout and then your the actual view, the actual view will overwrite that middle layer. It'll just get rid of it, because that's the way that Blade sections work. When you're in that nested eggshell thing, the middle shell takes precedence over all the extra shells, when you're dealing with the same section. Anyway, the cure is that in all those middle sections, instead of at end section, you do at overwrite. That is the cure. It is actually not documented.
Is it not at all?
It's actually hard to find this answer now. You should go there and check me if you just Command F at overwrite. I'd be kind of willing to bet you don't find it. We're doing it live.
We're doing it live. Oh, except my internet's going slow. Hold on. Look at this. Warning, you're browsing documentation for an old version of Laravel. I think I may have been involved in that decision to put that little note there. I just forgot it, but I'm glad
that's a great note. I love that.
Yeah. So the one I know is that there's at section and at end section versus at section and at show. I kind of thought that at section and at overwrite was, you didn't want to do it because overwrite actually overrode it, whereas at show allowed it to be extended or something like that.
Isn't it weird? You would think overwrite would be what I described as the default behavior, but overwrite is like stack. I don't know why it's called overwrite, and I don't know why it's not documented. Maybe I found it source diving or something. Maybe show is the thing to do, but show and section and then at show to me is weird. The language is weird.
Yeah,
it's a thing to get tripped up on. So I'll at least say that for me and every app I've ever built, at overwrite is the cure to these problems. So I'll just put that out there. But people look at the docs. Maybe don't use it. Maybe use at show.
Well, let's do a little digging after the thing, and maybe put. If either of us come up with the perfect thing, we'll tweet it and I'll put it in the show notes. But there's definitely, when you start with a section, you can either end it in end section, show, or overwrite, which is not documented. So I do actually want to step out for just 1 second. If you have never worked with Blade, a lot of our conversation here about templates has probably been a little bit confusing. So really quickly, let's just talk about templates. So let's imagine the most common Laravel app structure, which is not 3 layers, like Cable was just talking about, but two layers. You've got a file that is your primary template called usually layout/app.blade.php that has everything that all of your pages are going to have. So like he was saying, it's going to be the opening HTML tags and your head tags and your footer tags, stuff like that. And then where that content is, remember, just like we were talking about with the PJAX, there's this content section in the middle that is really what's different from page to page. Instead of putting any content there, you'd put the words at yield. And that's it, @ yield. And then all your actual content pages aren't going to be a full HTML page. They're going to be basically two things. The first line will say @extends, and then in that you pass in the name of the file that you just built as your layouts.app. You don't have to put blade.php, and that dot gets replaced with a slash. So if you say @extends layouts.app, what that means is go look for a file in layouts/app.blade.php and consider it the template. And then from there, you define a section. So you do that, two new lines, and then section, and then you put the name of the section. So if we named it content before, you say @section content, and then you type whatever you want to be in that middle body, and then you do whichever the appropriate one is, @show or @end section or whatever, and then that gets passed into the parent template. They're mushed together, and then that's the output. So when Caleb's talking about templating, that's really one of the most powerful things about Blade is the ability to do that thing where individual templates yield or open up certain kind of sections to have other things put content in them, and then later ones can extend that parent one and define those sections in there, saying, hey, give me everything that parent one has, and when it asks for this little section, here's what you should put there. So I think is that a pretty good description of it, Caleb?
Really good knowledge to fill in. Yep.
Yeah. So I just want to poke on one of them because I think it's valuable and I don't think a lot of people know about it. Can you tell me about stacks a little bit?
Yes. So I'm going to start at a place where maybe most people won't grab on, but I think it's a fun way of thinking about it. I think a better way to think of stacks is the portals concept in Vue or React. Mm-hmm. So if you're familiar with Vue, consider this problem. You are building an app. It's a Vue application. Vue is a JavaScript framework, whatever. And it's it's a foobar app. Who cares? In the middle, there's some component called body or modal or something where you have a form, whatever, I don't know. From that component, you have something that you want to show in the footer of the page. Like there's maybe a button to hit next or to hit hide or something like that. You basically, you want a portal, like the concept of I'm trying to think of a good example of portal, the game, Rick and Morty's portal, whatever. Everybody knows portals.
They know portals are.
Nether portal.
It's glowing. It takes you other places.
Yes. So in Vue, there is a concept of portals. I think it's native in Vue 3 now. I don't know. I think it's going to come out of the box. It used to be a plugin. But basically, where from any component, you could shove stuff into a portal, and then you could fetch stuff out of the portal from other places in your app. So in that footer, you could designate a portal target, which is saying like, here's where I want, and you would name it with another map. So maybe it's portal target footer. Then from any component, you could say, shove this block of HTML through the footer portal, and it'll show up there, which is great. And then you can set it for certain behavior. Like let's say there's 3 different components that are shoving HTML into these portals, and they're all coming out at this. By default, it would overwrite each other until the last one wins, but you can add the ability or specify the ability to append so that each new one is appended to the bottom. So I think that is a good mental model for stacks in Blade.
Yeah.
It took me a while. The reason I came to this is I started writing portals in Blade, and then I realized I had rewritten stacks. I was like, wait a minute, this is stacks. So the concept of a stack. Similar to a portal, a stack is something you can push to. You push from any Blade component in your entire app, and it will pop out wherever you specify a stack. So @stack footer, whatever, you could put that at the footer of your main layout. And then from any Blade file anywhere, you can say @push footer, specify, and then just throw in HTML, and it will show up there. And it will automatically, it's called stack. You can guess that it would append, but it stacks stuff on top of each other. And we could talk about common uses in a second, but how's that for a definition?
That's great. And I think that the easiest way to understand is the most common use case, which is pushing JavaScript scripts, into your footer that only one template needs or something like that. I think that's a perfect description. If you're not familiar with portals, I think if you can just imagine that any of your individual template sections could, regardless of where they are in the inheritance tree or @show or @end section or whatever, they could just say, hey, I don't care what's in there right now, just throw this script tag into there and just call it a day, and that's all you got to do.
Yes. So that is a common pattern where there's certain every app that I have a base or app, layout/app.blade.php or base.blade.php. And then right before the end of the body, I have a stack called scripts. So @stack scripts. And then in the head tag, right before the end of the head tag, I have @stack Usually I call it styles. That's just my convention, styles and scripts.
Me too.
And then anywhere else in my Blade file. So if I have a page called show user or whatever, and I return a Blade view called user.show. Inside of it, you have the at extends, then you have the at section for your whole content, but then you include like some like a JavaScript image cropping library or whatever. You include some bit on there that needs JavaScript, but you don't want to necessarily include that JavaScript on every page. So just on that page, after all of the other Blade stuff, after the at section, whatever, I'll have an at push scripts, and then I'll paste in the link to the CDN or the JavaScript file on my machine. That's a common use case for me because it's nice that like, I don't know, it's a really nice pattern of you don't want those scripts scattered in the middle of your file, or even if it's the JavaScript that you write yourself, like in a script tag, you want that stuff at the end of the page so you're not blocking the rendering of your site. So script stuff goes in at push scripts, and then occasionally I pull on, at push styles, but Stacks is a good one.
Here, 100%.
I have a friend, he's heavy into Stacks. It's like the only Blade abstraction he uses. He's a wild man. I think he uses it for layouting, for everything. He just loves it.
I don't know if I could do that, but I'm curious to see what it looks like in the end. So
I should say that I was talking to Taylor about some layout stuff with Livewire, and we're working on the new components, which we need to talk about. And we're just brainstorming on components, and I'm talking about some hiccup with layouts. And he goes, actually, man, he's like, I just use components for everything. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And I just saw it. So then I was like, I need to do this. Give me a second. So I go and I create a new app, and just instead of the whole layout confusion, whatever, you have a component called layout with slots. And I'll stop with the words here, but I'll say that like, I'm pretty sure Taylor doesn't even use layouts anymore.
Interesting.
I think he uses components for everything as the only
I'm going to have to pick his
abstraction.
brain about it later. But you know what? We're about to get to common challenges and gotchas. So before we do, why don't we touch on components? Components is brand new as of 2 months ago. And I know that you were a part of it being introduced, and components in Blade actually parallel components in Livewire super well.
Yes.
So can you just tell us, that's another reason why you're the perfect person to be on this podcast. So can you tell us a little bit about components?
Yes. So we'll start with includes, the concept of includes in a Blade file. At include is a Blade directive. Directive is the word for things that start with at in Blade. So at include, and then you specify a file, a Blade file, and it'll basically just shove it in there. So super simple concept. So components, a while ago, I don't know when they were introduced. They've been introduced, and they expand on the concept of an include. So they're kind of like an include, except it's worth noting that their scoping is different. I don't know if we want to get into that. I'm going to skip it for now. But it is a gotcha. Maybe when we talk gotchas, we'll talk scoping issues. So instead of at include, you can do at component, and it behaves just like an include on the surface, but you could also add an end component after that and shove HTML inside of that, which is a slot. If you're familiar with Vue.js, that's the concept of slots. So this was Taylor's like first attempt at bringing some more advanced templating that we saw from the Vue world and JavaScript world, bringing it into the backend templating world. And there were some cool things there. So that would be the starting point. But I'll say that wasn't enough for me. Having tasted Vue, having like my biggest complaint with Blade is that it feels antiquated. And the components in Vue are such a better abstraction in terms of there's slots, there's named slots, there's attribute forwarding. We can get into that later. They look better. They look like tags, so they're syntax highlighted, where Blade components are at, component, then a big long list and so whatever. So I wrote this manifesto of like, basically Blade would be amazing if the components worked just like Vue. So I wrote out like this spec of like, they need to have this, and this. And because I had written Livewire, which is built on this concept of components, I had already had sort of an arsenal of like, here's exactly how it could work without the live part, just the component part, because people were using Livewire components without the Livewire
without
part,
any interactivity,
just as a better component abstraction. It was a good
organization. Yeah, totally.
So anyway, components got a huge upgrade in the latest version of Laravel, Laravel 7, and I adore them. I think they've redeemed Blade. I think people are all about them, and the craze will only continue. I think they're bringing people back to Blade. They're so sexy.
Wow.
I do.
All right.
I do believe that.
That's awesome.
Okay.
I mean, I love them, but it's interesting. I've never imagined the idea of using them for a full layout, but now I'm like thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, it totally makes sense. So now my next challenge to me myself will be to be using only components, no inheritance, and see how I feel about it. So
yeah.
I mean, it's kind of a composition over inheritance type thing, right? Like programming already tells me I'm supposed to do that. So
it's perfect.
Obviously better.
Yeah, the concept of slots is like closures in programming. It's great.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Okay, let's get on to common challenges and gotchas. So first, we're going to jump back to routing for a little bit. What do you think gets people tripped up the most as they're working in either learning routing in Laravel or just in general? What do you think people get stuck on the most with routing?
Fortunately, it's really simple. So I think it's like, I don't remember struggling with it a lot. I don't think it's something that trips people up too much because it's fairly straightforward, I think. But I do have a couple like specific gotchas that I've run into. So really, honestly, the big one that I think is a little deeper is, okay, when routes, yes, when you have two competing routes in the same file. So if you have so here's a thought experiment. You have route get Matt Stauffer, and then echo hey Matt, and then you have route get Matt Stauffer right after that, echo hey Caleb. And then you go in your browser to /Matt Stauffer. What shows up? What do you think, or what do you know shows up?
Hey Caleb, right?
Right, and that would make sense because something declared after another thing overwrites that thing. That's what you would think. And that is the way it works. Now, let's say that I declare... I
was like waiting for you to tell me I was wrong. And
no.
Right?
I'm saving that.
You're saving the time where I'm wrong for a second.
And you might not be wrong. You likely know this.
We'll see.
But this is something that is always confusing to me. And I had, before this call, I just decided to check it out to get an answer, to gift to the listener. Here is the answer.
I love it.
So wildcard routes in Laravel, they're a way to... you could say route : you're going to have to help me with the syntax because I write them so infrequently. Route : get slash, you could do /*, is that right? Or is it like curly brackets and then star?
I think it would be curly brackets and then, I don't even think it has to be star.
But
yeah. You mean like the global wildcard, not just for a section.
Well, let's just say it's just a section. Yeah, forget about the global stuff. Forget about the asterisks.
So let's do like /posts braces ID, right?
I'd like to stick with the original Matt Stauffer because we have everybody in that line space. So we had route get Matt Stauffer and then route get Matt Stauffer. Now the above route get Matt Stauffer becomes route get curly brace name, whatever.
Right.
And curly brace. So in Laravel, this is a wildcard route, and anything that matches it, like you were getting at, if it's /post /curly brace ID, everything with /posts will hit that, and then whatever is the ID will get passed to the route. So anyway, you would think that you would declare a wildcard first, and then if I declared route get Matt Stauffer after, that would be the thing that would take precedence. You would think that. You declare the catch-all, and then you declare the specific instances. Well, if you go to Matt Stauffer in the browser, you would get Matt Stauffer. So this is a common gotcha, I think, because it's reversed to, it's unintuitive.
Yeah, good thinking.
You have to declare the specific routes above the wildcard routes for them to properly work.
And it's because the fact that the wildcard routes, once defined, have captured that thing and they don't even get to be passed to the other one.
Yes.
That's interesting. Yeah. That's a good point.
It's actually, there's a bug in Livewire that I just dealt with in testing that somebody just PR'd so that Livewire registers a route. I have to then like bust it out so that it registers it first because they have a wildcard route in their app. So I have to make Livewire more flexible so that it doesn't break their app. But this is something that people come across.
Good. Yeah, I ran into that problem when I was doing translations on OnRamp because I had to do wildcard where the first segment of your entire app is going to be the language that you're working in because that's there's different like structures.
Sure.
And so Nova stops working and the auth stops working and all these different things because they're all expecting to be at the root. And so I had to bypass those things in weird or add whatever, all these different things to just allow the fact that the first route's going to be this, except in these certain circumstances. And sometimes I couldn't do that because the way you're thinking, because those routes were bound in a service provider, and that service provider was loaded later. So and then I have to do like these weird like it's a language unless it's one of these, and then it's actually a pass or whatever. So yeah, there's definitely some dances to be done there.
Yep,
so.
For sure. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that, right, like in general, root level wildcard is gonna bite you at some point.
Yes.
Like, and that's why the healthier one is to only do those in like /post/ whatever. Because that's gonna make more sense. You still like, well, what happens if I want /post/ create or whatever? Okay, you still have to think about those things, but there's less of them in that context. So
right.
Okay, so sorry, do you have more for routing?
I don't think so.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think that the only two are, one is wildcards, and two is if you're using any of the magical matching that we're talking about before, where you're using like resources controllers and stuff like that. Sometimes it can be hard to know where the match is coming from, which is why I think explicit is really valuable with routing for sure. So.
Yes, the more explicit, the better.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Blade. What are common gotchas? What gets people most tripped up when they're using Blade?
Yeah, I mean, the @override, I think, is a common one. Here's another one. So when you @include a section of HTML, so let's say you're returning a file called show user. You're returning a Blade view called show user, and it shows the user's profile, the avatar, stuff like that. And there's a bunch of redundancies on the page. Like maybe every row in the user's info is you repeat all this HTML. So you might break out an include. And an include is an abstraction. So it's like a variable of HTML. So you could break out some section and include whatever. The HTML, the Blade in that include has access to it has access to the parent scope. It has access to all the variables that your Blade view has access to. So if you pass a variable into your view from a controller, your includes have access to it. No problem. When you use a Blade component, they're walled off. So the scope does not bleed into the component. And you have to explicitly pass those things in as parameters into the component. So if you do a lot of prop drilling, basically prop forwarding, I prefer it that way. And in includes, you can actually pass variables into includes the same way you do a component, which is nice. But yeah, I think that's just a good thing to know. Blade scoping, I guess, that the components aren't scoped and includes are. I don't know, just a nugget.
I also think that @each. Which is basically like a convenience layer around, I think this is the right one, around for each and include at the same time, where you're basically each, the first thing's the list of things you're for eaching, the second one's the template. It also doesn't it doesn't pass the variables out.
Oh, interesting. Good to know.
Yeah, I think it's either that or some other convenience level like that, but I think it's @each that doesn't have it.
I stay away from that syntax.
I think I love it because I have to do @each includes all the time, although I'll probably end up moving to components. But I do think I remember like one of the things that you run into is in the docs even say like you can @each and you get past the item of the array that you're iterating over or the whatever the iterable, but you don't have the ability to get all the other things. And the docs literally say, and if you need them, just go to the classic @for each @include.
Gotcha.
Syntax.
Okay.
So,
yeah, good to know.
Yeah. Any other things that you think gets people tripped up about Blade a lot?
I think this is a concept that I've recently, since building Livewire, I got real clarity on, and it's simple enough that I wish I had clarity way earlier. And that is compiling, Blade compiling. Where that happens, when that happens, what is it? It's a concept that first I'll start where you might experience, where you might touch this problem or this feature, I guess. So you are developing your Laravel app and you have an error in your Blade file. So you have show user.blade.php, and let's say you literally throw an exception, who knows, whatever, have some bad syntax. The error message that you get will not, I actually don't know, the error handlers in Laravel ebb and flow in terms of how well they handle this sort of thing. So I don't know what it's like right now with Flare, but whatever. When you hit this error, you will likely see a reference. You will be expecting to see your Blade file. You'll be expecting to see the reference in the error to say /user/show.blade.php. You will not. You will see some obscure reference to a file called blah, 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 dot blade.php or .php.
.php, yeah.
Yeah, buried somewhere in some seemingly hidden directory that will sort of look like your file, but there'll be no Blade. And you might catch that or not. It's just PHP
tags, yeah.
Yes. So that is because all of the Blade that you write isn't what actually gets run by PHP. There's a compilation step that goes through, uses regex, searches for syntax that like, at for each. Well, we're going to replace that with actual PHP for each. So there's an entire compilation step that happens, before the code is actually run. And I think that is, it causes, there's a disconnect there, I think, for people, especially with errors in their blade. So so I'll start there, and then I have one extra tiny nugget with that.
There's an interesting note on that one as well, which is that if you can cache those views so that they're all generated once, and then they don't have to be generated on the fly. And so you should consider doing that as a part of your deploy step, but don't do it locally. Otherwise, you're going to have to regenerate the views every single time. Right.
So So this is a good point. I thought, as a not knowing how blade caching works, just from an outside in, there's artisan view cache, whatever. Is it artisan view cache for blade caching?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
I think so.
So artisan, yes, definitely artisan view cache. And so I thought, oh, cool. Everybody's talking about this, optimize, do it on the server. It's great. Makes sense. Cache all the views. I thought that it was some extra caching thing, some extra thing that I'm adding some layer of caching. And if I have a problem, I'll just get rid of it and go back to slow, PHP. I will say that is not the case. Every view that ever gets run is cached. So when you run view cache, it's just preemptively doing it. But when Laravel hits a view that it hasn't cached, it will cache it. And then it'll hold that cache. And it will expire that cache when it recognizes a difference between the file modified time on your cached view and on your blade file. That's how it works. There's literally a bit of code in Laravel's code base, like file m time greater than file m time, then redo the cache. So it helped me to understand that, forget about artisan view cache, Laravel's always caching views. Artisan view cache is just like pre-cache them all.
It's like it's just a micro optimization so that no individual user has to be the first person to hit that cache now.
So I don't even do it.
It's certainly it's exactly what you said. It's minuscule. Because I'm in the practice of running all the caches when I deploy, I just throw that one in there. But you're 100% right. So, and interestingly, I do think that like one of the things that's beneficial with the view cache, you can also do view clear, I believe.
Yes.
That's the more helpful one.
Exactly.
Because every once in a while, because of Git pulling or something like that, you're going to get an issue where it's very infrequent where Laravel's unable to notice that the view should have been recompiled. And so if you're like, I am 100% changing the source files, it's got to be Laravel's fault. First of all, most of the time it's actually you're changing the wrong source file. But every once in a while, Laravel caches them wrong, and then you do artisan view clear, I think is what it is, and that actually wipes all those cached files.
Here's the scenario where this will predictably occur, and is a good note for everybody listening. If you are ever creating your own custom blade directives or aliasing blade components or anything like that, if you're ever doing that, those changes, so consider this example. You have the user show thing. You can create custom blade directives. We haven't even touched on it. It's fun. We're not going to get into it. But I've already explained directives. So you could create @Matt_Stauffer in your use whatever, and it's going to echo out Matt Stauffer. So in your service provider, you would say blade : directive Matt Stauffer, and then pass in a closure where you echo out Matt Stauffer. And so then in that view, you have @Matt Stauffer. You save it, you hit refresh in your browser, you see it on the page, you go, this is great, I have my new custom directive. And you go, wait a minute, it should say Caleb Porzio. So then in your service provider, you go and you change the echo from Matt Stauffer to echo Caleb Porzio. Then you refresh and it doesn't change in your browser, because if you think about it, no file modified time has changed. You've changed that directive at runtime. So you have to artisan view clear. So that's why you'll see a lot of like packages who provide changes to directives when they upgrade, run artisan view clear. If you use Nova, you have to artisan view clear because they, whatever. So anyway, that is something I have to be aware of a lot.
There's another very common one, which is that I've run into, which is that if you are bringing in a package that offers a directive and you put the directive call in your template, hit save before it finishes Composer requiring the template. So for example, if you're using Ziggy, this happens all the time. Someone types at Ziggy or at routes or whatever it is into their template, hits save, and then goes and does composer require titanco/Ziggy, and then they refresh the page and it just still says at Ziggy, because that template does not have a new modified time. So you can either go just literally hit enter and hit save so it gets a new modified time, or run PHPRs in view clear, and all of a sudden now it'll register it. And that was one of the biggest things we ran into like customer support issues with on the, or whatever you want to call them, is just like, why is it not working?
Yeah.
And I remember hitting it once and I'm like, I'm losing my mind. And it was exactly that. There was lots of files that were modified when I required that package, but the views to render this view were not any different afterwards. So
I get that with @Livewire. Same thing. People showing me just a page that says @Livewire, and it's
okay, cool. So
it's
the exact same thing then.
Yep.
And that the other instance for that is if you, that shouldn't happen. Oh, if you pull the updated, so if somebody adds Ziggy or Livewire or whatever in a pull request, and then you pull down the updated code and you view it and you see @Ziggy, and then you go, oh, I need to go run composer install. You run composer install. That's the more common one. You pull down the templates, you render the view view caches at Livewire or at Ziggy, and then you run composer install, but now you're not getting it. That's the most common one. Yeah.
Got it.
Okay. Sorry. Totally nitpicks and nuance. Are there any other common gotchas for Blade that you haven't covered yet?
No, I think those are it. Yeah, the layout stuff, little nitty gritty stuff. That's there's one cool thing that I would like to mention if we have a second.
Yeah,
this is like a little nugget that I forget exists, and I recently rediscovered it and was freaking out. In Blade components, I'm not going to backfill all this information for some listeners who aren't intimately familiar with Blade components, but hopefully, if you've been following, enough along, this will make sense. If you have a Blade component, like @component, user name, whatever, user avatar. Again, it's kind of like an include, whatever. And like I said, with includes and components, you can pass data in. So maybe you want to pass in, the name. Okay, so you have like show user profile, whatever, @component user profile, and then you pass in a name parameter and then Caleb Porzio. And now when you load it in the browser, everything looks great, whatever. And then in your Blade template for that component, you would have like echo money sign name, and it would echo that out. Now let's say that because I'm special in my name, I want there to be an SVG icon, like Caleb Porzio with some SVG icon. I don't know what it would be, like upload or cloud or something. So to do that, what would I do? Would I hard code that SVG into that string? But then it'll get like escaped and it won't actually render as an SVG, right? Or what if I want to put a whole chunk of HTML for the name, right? Okay. In components, there's the concept of slots where you can pass chunks of HTML. You can name them even. The cool thing about components that I love and I wish Vue had, this is like better than Vue, that slots are the same as parameters being passed in. So at any time, you can name a slot name or a parameter name and just get rid of the parameter and use the slot and switch back and forth. And I do this thing all the time for it, and it is way more useful than you think. But at any time, you can drop down from the parameters you're passing in to a slot and have a full-on place to put in valid HTML with syntax highlighting. Super nice.
Yeah,
that's a good note.
That's awesome. And I'm trying to remember what there was some thing in like Yield, I think was the same thing, or section or something.
Yield,
I think
yes. Yield has a default.
Yeah. Well, it has a default, but I think with the default, and this is true for section 2, I think you can either pass the content of the default or section or whatever as a single string, which is the second parameter of the yield or the section, or you can do an entire block, which is what we normally do, which is kind of the equivalent to a slot. You're either passing that thing in as a string within the parentheses of the yield, or you're actually doing like I don't know if this is true for yield, but for section and section, you can also just like to section, you can just pass a second parameter, which is just the string that is that section.
Yes, you can you could say @section.
It's like the inverse of what you're saying.
Pass in a string. Yeah. Yes, yields have the ability. You're right, and that is the exact same level of awesome. Yields have the ability to have a default, so you can say like yield content, comma, and then some default. But it's like useless because there's no way to do HTML and then end yield for a default. Like to me, it's like it would be so much more useful. Okay, that's what I was asking.
Can you do that with yield?
You can't. Okay. Yes, but with section you can. You're right.
Well, I wonder if that's when you'd want to use overwrite then.
That's when you'd want to use overwrite.
Or stop, or whichever one overwrites the parent's content. Instead of using a yield, you do a section with with content,
dude.
and then the child would just.
I wonder if it does that. If you don't ever need a yield at the end of your sections, that would be sick, Mr. Matt.
We'll have to go. We're definitely going to have to do like a whole bunch of like little test runs of stop versus end section versus yield versus whatever, and how they all work.
Yes.
So,
yep,
it's fun. So it's funny because the next thing on this podcast list is the thing where I talk about the fact that you and I have a shared affinity for blade templating, and apparently I just forgot and I just talked about it at the beginning. So we've already done that.
Great.
It probably would have made a lot more sense to talk about it here when I planned it instead of the beginning. So sorry, everybody. But yeah, so the last two pieces are, is there anything else you want to talk about the topic, and how should people learn more? So let's start with that. Is there anything else other than that great little nugget, which is already kind of basically a part of, is there anything else you want to cover on routing or blade?
Oh, probably one other thing that came to mind really quick. When you extends, when you're extending a layout, you can pass parameters into the extends. So this is a common use case is if your base layout file has a title tag with a default of your app name, but a lot of pages you should have a more appropriate title tag. My favorite place to do it, instead of like doing it in the controller or something, my favorite place is extends, layouts.app, comma, then an array, of keys and values. And the key would be like site name or title. The key would be title, and then hard code in the title there. So yeah, that would be one.
All right, that's awesome. So are there any good articles or tutorials or in general just learning resources? If you think that somebody really wants to learn Blade, where would you direct them to go?
I would say read through the Blade docs, step one, definitely. And then Laracast is probably the best place to learn it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd go to Laracast and I'd learn about Blade.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I bet that one of the YouTube teachers probably has some good stuff. So you're looking for something free to start with, go check it out. Because there's a couple people like Traversy and other people who've started covering Laravel recently. So if you want some free stuff, start there. But, Laracast is definitely, the canonical place to learn, up-to-date stuff about Laravel. So I'm with you on that one.
If you want to dig into Blade components, so the Livewire documentation has a screencast section, and there, I think this one is actually a paid one. So you have to sponsor me for $14 a month. But yeah, I know. But I did a series on extracting out form inputs to custom the new Laravel 7 Blade components. And I'm just super jazzed about it. It's so great. I'm addicted to it. It's like it's so rare that I come across an abstraction as flexible and expressive and powerful as it is. It's so good. So basically I take a bunch of basically all of my, when you have especially if you're using Tailwind UI and you import like a text field, it's like 70 divs with a zillion classes and whatever. You can't just go throwing that stuff around your app. So you make all these little custom components for form groups and input types, and it's pretty good stuff. So check that out if you're into the new Blade component stuff.
Sweet.
Yep.
Okay, so my personal fun moment for you, and in case it sounds to anybody like I'm rushing through, I'm having such a good time talking, I just looked up and realized we're at like an hour and a half, so that's why I'm like, I guess we should keep going.
I feel like we were getting rolling, and I glanced and said 45, and I was like, oh boy.
Yeah, me too. I was like, oh shoot. So my personal fun moment for you is, I know that at one point in time you were on track to be like a personal finance guru of sorts. Is that still something that are you kind of super frugal and super thrifty? And if so, what's the first tip or resource you would give somebody to really think about their financial, future? And if not, kind of what made you kind of walk off of that space a little bit?
Yeah, right. It could go either way. I think the answer is a little bit of both. Yeah, I was really hardcore into personal finance, and specifically the FIRE movement, for those listening, Financial Independence Retire Early. Yeah, so I was into that. Mr. Money Mustache. I'm still a mustachian. I think his content is some of the best content on the internet. On any topic. So I love him and still do. And I do a lot of credit card hacking still. And and I am frugal. Yes. I spend more than I did probably, but no, still frugal. I still live in the same apartment I did when I shortly after I started at Titan. It's like a 2-bedroom apartment. I don't know. We just have we have one car. We share a car. I just said to Hannah yesterday, I was like, I don't think we know a single other couple that shares a car. Not even one. Like, we don't live in a city that has tons of public transport, and everybody has cars. And anyway, so stupid stuff like that, like, yes, I'm frugal. But I don't stress about it. I don't measure stuff like I did before. I'm not. But I think it's worth saying that I think there was a one-on-one we had a while ago when I was first launching my personal finance guru brand called Fancy Finance Man. And I was picking your brain on whether or not to brand it separately. Like what do I do? Do I have Caleb Porzio Twitter account and then Fancy Finance Man Twitter account? Because what about all the finance people? Are they going to be like, why is he tweeting about tech? And so you remember that discussion?
I do, but I don't remember what I said. I assume I said you should make them all one.
So there was a good moment that I sort of look back, like if I'm being really, I don't know if narcissistic's a heavy word for it, but if I'm just like pretending that this is my like memoirs or something, I would, given my current endeavors with programming and how far I believe that I've come, however far that is, there was this moment where I was like, yeah, Matt, I'm going to mess this up, but you basically said that you could totally just be the finance guy in the Laravel community. Like nobody's speaking about, personal finances at Laracon. Like you were like offering me this path. You were like sort of delving into that. And I remember saying like, no, I want to be a good developer in my own right or something like that. Something prideful. I don't know. I was like, no, I can't be known for personal finances. I have to be known for code. And you said something like, well, that's admirable or whatever, just probably like, all right, shut up. And you're like, yeah. So anyway, so I think back on that now, and like the finance thing went nowhere. I ditched the podcast after like 3 episodes, and and the programming thing went somewhere. So that's a moment that I look back on in my head. The moment I almost became the personal finance guy in Laravel.
The personal finance guy. Well, the interesting thing is like what I'm most interested for most people, because I want to turn this into like a tip for other people. I think what I'm most interested in is to recognize that like very seldom do people make their name from purely being just a good programmer, period. People make their name from being particularly good with a modifier after that. And the particularly good is and teaching it really well, or at a particular tech stack, or at something that the people around them are not particularly good at.
For sure.
And so I think that one of the things that's very interesting is that like, I think there's few people who, no matter what they do, just kill it. Taylor's there, Adam's there for sure. I think that you're showing some of the breadth of your abilities by like, both of your things are front end, they're connected, but you built a Laravel plugin and a JavaScript framework that's getting, lots of attention from non-Laravel people. So that's some breadth, right? I would say for a lot of people, a good moment to become known in the community is still to say, I am the blah, blah, blah expert in blah, blah, blah space.
Sure.
And that doesn't mean that you're not focusing on being a good programmer, but there's so many programmers out there that stick, it's like the sticky, it's almost kind of like schlocky or sticky or whatever. It's kind of what helps it, like you get known as the blah, blah, blah guy or the blah, blah, blah girl before you get known as Caleb. And I think that one of your intents there was to say, no, I don't want to be the blah, blah, blah guy. I want to do the harder work of just becoming known as an excellent programmer, Caleb. And I think one of the ways that you can achieve that is by choosing instead to give yourself a platform where you talk about many different things or program in many different things and show that you have something wise to say about all of them. For example, the 20% Time podcast. And I think that a lot of your fame came from the 20% Time podcast, where you and Daniel showed that no matter what topic you broached, you had the ability to be excellent thinking programmers on all of them. So you didn't need the shtick of being, hey, I'm the guy who knows, whatever topic, because you could say, I'm in a platform right now where I can talk about all the topics. And I think that's a great way to do it if you can do it. The problem is a lot of people start a podcast and not gone anywhere with them. So like 100%, like you did it in a way that was in line with your values. I think to other people, I would say like, do it that way if you can, sure. But there is sometimes like, basically like take whatever the route is that you can take to getting known as a good programmer, even if it's a good programmer in X, because once you're known as that, you can then explore the fact that you're a good programmer in Y as well. Does that make sense?
For sure. Yeah. No, it's definitely still good advice. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yep. Yeah, I guess I
sorry,
always
everyone-
picture
go ahead.
it's one of those things that like let's just say that this is there's a bias here for like people who become successful at something, like just say that
Survivor bias.
yeah, survivor bias. So
Basically.
I'm
Yeah.
sure I have that where I'm like no, just go for it.
Just do what I did.
Yeah,
Like everyone,
exactly.
if you do what I did, you will be successful like I was.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm very aware of that at play. I guess the thought process behind it for me, where the way I saw it was like some people get it's tough to talk. These are the things that I always have a hard time talking about in the Laravel community because they're about the Laravel community. But let's say there's like some people at any given Laracon who manage to be like friends with the upper tier of Laravel developers, but they don't have the code, the packages, the work that happens the rest of the year to sort of back it up. Now it's fine to be friends with anybody, and there shouldn't be like this like developer elite status and then the rest of the whatever. It's not like that, but this is the lens that I sort of view it through. Is like I just knew that I didn't want to be that person who was just friends with people who were really prominent developers. I wanted to at least like I didn't want that. I don't know, something about that just didn't feel good to me. So I wanted to because I want to be someone who's putting in the work too all year. It was like really like sweating it and talking about stuff and putting it in so that when this conference comes, I've earned my place at the table instead of just, being there because I make good jokes or because I am good at personal finance. I don't know. I'm not trying to like poo on your advice. It's good advice.
No, it's fine.
That's sort of that's the way that my brain worked that led me there, I guess.
Yeah. And I think it absolutely makes sense. And I think that I'm glad you didn't listen to that advice. So just for anybody listening, I think you did the right thing, and part of what I was actually saying there is, I proposed like 3 or 4 different ideas. I do remember that. And I just said, do you want this? You could blah, blah, blah. Do you want this? And you'd be like, nah. I'm like, okay, cool. That's one less.
Right.
If you were able to be successful enough in your financial whatever thing that you didn't have to be a programmer, would you want this? And you're like, no. I was like, cool. That helps you get some definition.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
But somebody who does remind me of that, what you're saying there is like, think about Jonathan Rennick. Like Jonathan Rennick knows a lot about a lot of topics.
For sure.
And yet he's the database guy right now. He doesn't mind it. He's definitely digging into it. But I don't think anybody who's ever worked with him as a programmer would say that guy only knows databases. Right.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
So even among like super, super talented programmers who have earned their keep, there's a diversity of how much you do or don't want to focus. So I think the biggest note here is that everyone should have all the information, and then decide what works for them. And I'm glad you found what works for you, and I'm glad you didn't listen to my advice about the fancy finance man thing. You're 100% right, and I love the space you're in, man. So I'm not feeling rejected at all, and I'm glad you're here.
Yeah. No, that's a fantastic point. He's a good example of somebody who, that's funny because like he's the database guy, he's the eloquent guy.
Yeah.
But he's so much more than that, and has a whole rich history in PHP. So that definitely is a good point. And I mean, really, if you love it, I mean, I love it, and I love it, and I love working hard at it. And so you just do that over a long enough timeline, and certain things stick. So whatever, like you find little cool things. Like if sushi happened before any of this other stuff, like maybe I would get into being the guy who fixed Eloquent. Like Parental happened, and I could have been. I'm not saying I could have been Jonathan Rennick, but there's definitely those things. Just follow the paths that stick, and the holes in the community, and the more holes that get filled. I don't think this is a zero-sum game because my brain goes there, but I know that's not the truth. But I do see like friends of mine in other ecosystems where I'll be like, oh, there's holes there, like because we saw it with Adam, like him coming into here and being like, there's holes everywhere. Like these people don't even know about collections, like.
Yep.
Just
it's so funny because I told one of my friends, I was like, so this guy who works with me, Adam, he's writing this thing about collections, and I think it's gonna be a really big deal, and I'm super excited about it. He's like chuckling. He's like, oh yeah, we have collections in Rails, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and I was like, okay. And so he was basically using that to say like, Adam's not gonna see any success. I was like, no, it's gonna be awesome. You just wait and see. And then later he was like, well, damn. And I was like, I know, you weren't ready for that. So there's definitely a lot to be said about that.
For sure.
All right, well, that was my personal fun moment. Oh no, you missed the one piece though. If someone were your average American, and I'm sorry everybody else, if you're an average American, the age of 20 to 40, and sorry people outside of the age range, what would you think like the first step that they would take towards maybe being a little bit more thoughtful or protective or careful or fiery or whatever about their finances?
The number one thing I would say to do, it's very simple and it's not too hard and it has amazing results. Clickbait. It is measure every penny you spend for a month. Every single penny that leaves your, if you are a company, every single penny that goes in and goes out of you and your company, measure it, write it down, categorize it. And I like believe this more than anything in the world. What's measured is improved. Like you can't improve something if you haven't felt the pain of how not good it is. And a great way to feel that pain is to go through transaction by transaction and read Tim Hortons. I'm dropping Buffalo/Canadian references here. Tim Hortons bagel, Tim Hortons bagel, Tim Hortons bagel, Tim Hortons bagel.
Yeah.
You know, $4.50. Not a big deal.
Yeah.
Sum it up for a month. Wait a minute. I've had moments where I'll literally go back and check my math because it doesn't. Yeah. There's some like mental thing.
There's no way I spent that much money on bagels and the coffee. Yeah.
There's a fortune cookie that I once read that went something like this. Many holes. Wait. I was going to say, I was thinking of two different fortune cookies. The bad fortune cookie is the Great Wall didn't got built in a day, and then I would make fun of that fortune cookie a lot. But the fortune cookie I'm trying to say is many small holes sink great ships. Yeah, and that is the most true thing I can say about personal finances is it's much less about the big things, although those matter too. But basically, if you measure everything for a month, you'll feel so much pain from it. You'll also realize I have a whole category in my budgeting app called it's called BS, the full word, because it has to say the full word to fully express what it means. And basically I do it when I come across something and I'm mad at it. I go like, this is BS. And I label it that because it's like something I signed up for and forgot to close. And I just feel like an idiot. And I'm so angry at it. I'll see like, wait, or some like a friend who looped me into one of their whatever schemes. And I see that transaction show up. And those are the things that you miss. If you never look at every transaction, you miss all the ways you're bleeding out. And then there's the bigger obvious things like kill all your debt. Cars this is the mustaching thing, is like the root of all financial problems for everybody in America is cars, because they make you fat, they make you diseased, you die early, they weigh on our healthcare system, they also weigh on our environment, and they weigh on your pocketbook first and foremost, because you buy new cars and you spend way too much and you have debt and you know whatever. So cars is a huge one. And then houses and all those things. I don't know, but that's my thing is what's measured is improved. Measure everything for a month. Feel the pain of those bagels, and you will improve and you will get clarity. After that, you will be motivated, and that's what I got.
I love it. Tim Hortons. That's my shortcut to the whole thing.
Tim Hortons.
Watch for the Tim Hortons.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have a million projects going on. I'll link all of the stuff that we've talked about in the show notes, but you've also got some sponsorship opportunities. So let's talk real quick. How can people follow you? What do you want to plug? How can they support you and what you're doing as an open source maintainer?
Sure. So Livewire and Alpine are my things. It's now being branded as the Tall Stack, Tailwind, Alpine, Livewire, and Tallstack. What is it? Tallstack.com?
Yeah, tallstack.dev, I think.
Tallstack.dev. Matt/Titan folks put together tallstack.dev.
I just wanted to play with Tailwind UI one day, and I was like, all right, Tallstack it is.
Cool. So those are my things. So if you're into that stuff, you're into my stuff, and that's great. Twitter's the best place to follow me day to day. I try to tweet, I don't know, fun, useful things. I tweet whatever. And then the other project that's kind of out of left field is my VS Code course. This is like totally not related to anything else. Well, actually, it's related to everything else because every programmer uses an editor, and a lot of them use VS Code. And VS Code is I'll say broken in a lot of ways out of the box. It's great, and that's why I use it. But there's so many frustrations, so many little frustrations, and also just development workflow. Like, I guess I've just honed my workflow over a long time, and I started tweeting about it. Enough people were interested, so I started a little email list. If you're into that, go to VS Code or learn-vscode.com to get on that email list. yeah, so there's a ton of good content you'll get right away. Like every other day, you'll get an email, and there's like 7 really good emails. But now I've sort of stopped those, and I'm building like an actual course, and I'm writing 1,000 plugins, and I'm in the weeds of the valley of despair with this course. But the draft is written. I have all the drafts for the plugins written. I want to fix VS Code specifically for Laravel developers, but for everybody. So that's another thing to tune into. Yeah, and then the last thing. Sponsoring. That's my main, actually now it's my primary source by far of income is GitHub sponsors. I realized getting in all this that open source does not pay you anything. You sort of think that people who have successful open source projects are just somehow get a lot of money, but it's not true at all. So I'm trying to change that with GitHub sponsors by offering lots of things with that. You get access to screencasts and source code and whatever, but yeah, so sponsor me to support the work if you like the work. That's that.
Yep. And the links to that and all the other things we've talked about so far will all be in the show notes, so you can check them out. Caleb, thank you so much for your time. This was a ton of fun. Of course, we ran late because there's way too many things to talk about, and half of these could have taken an extra hour. But I really appreciate you joining me, all the things you're doing for the community. And yeah, man, thanks for hanging out.
Thanks for having me. It's a blast.
All right. See you all next time.
We're now recording. Let me call Aaron.
Mr. Caleb or maybe Hannah.
Mr. Aaron. Hannah's here in secret. Aaron, I am recording an episode of the Laravel podcast. Matt Stauffer, who hosts it, is having me on. And I'm looking through these prep questions, and one of them is, let's start with routing. If you had to describe the idea of routing in a web app to a 5-year-old, how would you do it? And I thought, well, why don't I call an almost 5-year-old and see if I can explain it to him? Do you have an almost 5-year-old on?
I'm a 5-year-old, or you want me to get one of my kids?
I would like a child that's closest to the age of 5. I would love to try to explain Laravel routing to him if he's around.
Uncle Caleb needs to talk to you about something. Here's Sam. Say hi.
Hi, Uncle Caleb.
Sam, how's it going?
Good.
Sam, I have a question for you. I need to try to explain the way websites work to someone. Do you know how websites work? Sam,
I think I do.
Do you know what a website is?
I've heard that before, but I don't know what it is.
Gotcha. Do you ever go on the iPad and look at stuff?
Yes.
Yeah. What do you do on the iPad?
I know. Like.
What's that, Sam?
These like go over here and it's like it comes to Aunt Hannah.
So you go on the iPad to talk to Aunt Hannah?
No, Danny does.
Oh, Danny does. Do you ever have you heard of Google?
Yeah.
Do you know what Google does?
What?
Do you know what Google does? Have you ever used Google, Sam?
No.
No. Sam, have you ever used a computer before?
Yes, I type.
Oh, you do?
Dad.
You type on a computer?
Mhm.
What kind of computer?
He makes words and I say what they are.
Oh. So he types what you tell him to?
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. That's great, Sam. I think that's all I needed to know. I just wanted to know if you knew how to use computers, and I wanted to talk to you about it. So that's actually it. Bye, Sam. Thanks.
Was he supposed to say goodbye?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the routing thing's not gonna work for.
You want the older one?
I want the 7-year-old. 7, right?
Yeah. You gotta talk loud enough.
Hi.
Dano, how's it going, Dan?
Good.
Dan, I'm recording a podcast later today, and I need to talk to you about websites because I need to know how to explain websites to a kid who's like 7 years old. You're 7, right?
Yep.
Okay. So can I just ask you some questions about websites?
Sure.
Do you use the computer ever?
Sometimes to write stories.
Okay. Do you ever go on like Facebook or Instagram or anything like that with your mom or dad?
No.
Do you ever answer like quizzes with your mom?
Sometimes.
Okay. And when you're answering the quizzes, can you like explain to me how it works? Like you see a question and then you click a button to answer it or something?
Yeah.
Okay. So how does it work?
So it's like, it gives you the question. There's like 5 different options. You hit a button. At the end, it tells you what you are or something.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. So basically what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out how to explain to people what web apps are. Have you ever heard the word web app?
No.
No. So your dad and me, like we're programmers, right? Like you've seen him program and stuff.
Yeah.
And we program web apps, which are basically just websites. So when you're using that quiz, you're using a web app. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And what I'm supposed to explain is how routing works. And routing's just a fancy word, but this is the whole point of this is I'm trying to figure out if I can explain routing to a 7-year-old. So are you ready? Can I explain routing to you?
Yeah.
Okay. So get ready. I need you to get your thinking cap on. Tell me when your thinking cap is on.
Thing.
Okay. Got it. Was that the noise that it makes when you put it on?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So here's what routing is. Basically, so if I have a web app, like a quiz app that you go on and you click buttons to answer the quiz, when you click a button, what you're doing is you are telling the web app's routes. You're basically telling the web app's router to do something. And then usually that something shows you an answer, right? Like after you click the quiz answer, it shows you an answer.
Yeah.
Okay. So so inside of a web app, if that quiz app is a web app and a web app is like a little machine, when you click a button, the router is the thing that actually does the thing. Like it's the thing that processes your answer and tells you if it was right or wrong. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like telephone numbers, like for a website. When you're on a website and you click on something, the router is the thing that knows where to take you. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you try to explain routing to me?
Yeah. So when I'm doing like quizzes,
Okay.
you like when you hit a button, it like tells the iPad, computer, phone thing, like the technology to do something. And at the end, it like tells you what it is.
Nice. So which part is the router?
The router for quizzes
Yeah.
is like when you hit the button
Nice.
and it tells the thing.
Danny, you're a genius. That's it. You got it, Dan. I just needed to know if I could do it and if you could do it. And you did it. We did it.
Yay.
Sweet. Thank you for being a genius, Danny.
Welcome.
Okay. I'll be seeing you.